Well, let's get started. Let's see. My name is Wayne Conger, the founder and CEO of Huts. I'm joined by Joseph Brookover, who's Huts' studio director. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Wayne, good to be here.
Um, and today we're going to have another installment of our How We Do It series. And here we're going to go over something maybe a little bit less kind of immediately practical. A lot of these How We Do It series are around singular steps in our process. How do we do interiors procurement? How do we do contractor sourcing? Here we're going to be going over a theme. How do we do it starter homes? And as I'm sure a lot of you know, starter homes are a very hot topic in the world at the moment and have been for years with America's housing crisis and limited supply of affordable housing. And as we've been going through building out Huts, defining our product, defining our process, more and more we're seeing that we may have a role to play in offering a solution to starter homes. And in some cases, a lot of our projects feel like starter homes. So today we're going to go through some of our perspective on starter homes, some of Huts' relationship to starter homes, and some of the projects that we're working on currently that meet the criteria of starter homes. So we're going to go through a few things here. One, our definition of what is a starter home, and then a review of where are these new starter homes today, Huts' relationship to the starter home, a few examples of starter home projects, one in Vermont, one in Martha's Vineyard, one in Northern Catskills, three very different markets, and then a bit of a look to the future, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A. So what is a starter home? And when we think of a starter home, we might be picturing something like this, a kind of Cape style home. This one is in Atlanta, sort of a 40s era Cape. And you see similar sort of structures. This one's a little bit smaller outside of Denver. This one in Portland, Maine. And everyone out there in the United States is familiar with this format of housing stock. It was largely built in mass from, say, the end of World War II all the way up into the 70s, somewhat into the 80s. And a lot of America's single family housing stock looks a lot like this, regardless of where you are in the country. And traditionally, a starter home in the US is a small, affordable house, typically purchased by first-time buyers, offering basic amenities and manageable mortgage payments. It serves as an entry point into homeownership, allowing buyers to build equity before potentially moving to a larger residence or adding to the existing one. And so this is a lot of the traditional perspective on what a starter home is, but I want to pick out a few of the kind of key terms that we think about within this description. First of all, that it's small or space efficient. And as a rule, tends to be that starter homes are somewhere between 1.5 bedrooms and maybe stretching into 3 bedrooms, around 750 square feet up to 1,250 square feet. Above that, not exactly a starter home, starts to become a larger space. Below that would be hard to imagine a small family living there for any extended period of time. So there's sort of a sweet spot that represents the starter home. Next is that it's affordable, and affordability is a very hot topic and a very charged topic, but I think it's important to think about it relatively to the local market. And so a lot of the ways that we think about affordability is thinking about what is the median gross income in the area that would be required to purchase a house, and the starter home payment should represent no more than 25% of gross income in that area. Anything more than that, it's not exactly affordable, certainly not a starter home. And so that gives us sort of a way to think about this nationally without putting just a hard number to it and saying, hey, a house is 300 grand or a house is 200 grand. It's really about the relative conditions market by market. And the last, and I think it's one of the most important, is what is the role of this house going to be for you in the future? And so how are you going to build equity in the starter home and then grow into something new should you choose? And that may mean the kind of traditional version of trading up to a larger house. It may be, or it could be these other two strategies that are a little bit closer to Hutz's heart of expanding the existing and thinking about how do we start with this existing housing stock and tack onto it over time through additions or expansions, or how does it become the starting point for a portfolio that you kind of build equity in this project. You no longer fit into the house anymore. You need to think about what's going to happen next. How does the use of the property change from primary home into rental property or investment property? And so for us, a starter home really has these criteria that it's space efficient, it's affordable relative to the market conditions and local earnings, and that there's some kind of plan baked into the design for growth. And that might either be growth in the use case or growth in the actual square footage. So great, that sounds awesome. Should be a lot of those. Where are they? Where are all the new starter homes? And what you find is that this sort of housing stock still exists readily across the country, but the traditional starter home housing stock is getting older. It's getting more expensive to maintain and manage, and generally in need of upgrades and repairs. And so, if you're buying it as existing housing stock without those repairs, it might fall into the category um, of space efficient, but starts to get expensive on your ongoing maintenance costs. If you need to upgrade it and go through repairs, now you're getting into an issue of the house having all of this kind of new cost tacked onto the square footage that you're buying, um, and and it becomes less and less sort of desirable when it's gone through those sorts of conversions. Paired with that, you have traditional large scale developers that are completely disincentivized to take on the risk of developing new starter homes. And we'll get into some of why that is. But the crux of it is that developers have a single moment to make money on selling a house. And it's at the moment of transaction. And their goal is to arbitrage the cost of construction against per square foot, against how much they can sell each square foot for. So, how can I build the most square footage at the cheapest rate to sell that square footage at the highest amount? You look at that equation, it doesn't, none of that says anything about what a starter home is or what the format of a starter home might be. And then on the other side, on the design side, standard architect and design fees tend to blow up the build budgets and push better designed single family homes out of the starter category, that tacking on the soft costs of a well designed, contextually designed, site specific project tends to completely blow up a project or a home from being considered one that could fit into the criteria of being a starter home anymore, once you add in those fees. So what you end up with is a lot of land that is seeking highest and best use and squeezing the most out of it. And developments like this in urban and suburban markets end up being what is kind of described as a starter home today. They're essentially small scale condos, with some other amenities. And I think for a certain person, these work quite well, but I wouldn't say that they necessarily fit into, they're a way to purchase a property, but don't necessarily fit into the category of starter homes, because while they might be space efficient, they tend to not be affordable relative to the market. And there's certainly no plan for growth on them. They're sort of done. There's nowhere to go beyond. If you start with the one bedroom, that's going to be what you have inside of the drywall. That's going to be the end of it. That's what's available to you. So they are maybe affordable or approachable housing units, but not necessarily a starter home that gives you a trajectory for how to go forward in your housing journey. And then in rural settings, there's some truly horrific things happening, like this nightmarish development that I wrote about not too long ago, called Elm Trails from Lennar, one of the largest publicly traded housing developers outside of San Antonio, where they are kind of repackaging, either call it tiny homes as a starter property in what you can see is some of the least expensive and least desirable land you could imagine underneath the high tension power lines. Um, but really, it's a repackaging of this sort of housing arrangement, the kind of mobile home development, which, by the way, is today America's most commonly built single family housing type. And so developments like this in the rural space being executed by large scale tract home developers, yeah, they're space efficient homes. They are tend to be affordable relative to the market, but there's no plan for growth, both because of restrictive covenants in the purchase agreements that they can't be used for rental, and that the lots don't allow for it. There's nowhere to go on these properties. So also not exactly a route towards new starter home development. On the hut side, we kind of think about this in between space. What is the format that the product needs to be? And also, what does our business approach need to be better positioned to help support the delivery of starter homes? And so our business model really puts us closely in alignment with starter home clients. So as a fee developer, our studio design fees have no relationship to the cost of construction. If you look at typical architect fees or really contractor fees or anyone that's sort of working in the built environment, they tend to quote their cost based on a percentage of the cost of construction. So they'll say, hey, we take 15% of the cost of construction as our fees. So as the house gets bigger, their fees go up. And that really uh, gets the client and the designer or developer or service provider out of sync because the service provider is incentivized to give you to push on you the largest possible house and again bump out of the starter category. Whereas with huts, we often say with early stage clients, we're sort of indifferent whether you spend 300 grand or 3 million on your house, we're going to do the same things and that our process follows similar steps. So whether it's a smaller house, we'll have our approach to go from design documentation through to development and delivery. On a larger house, we have the same steps and they have no relationship to the scale or cost of that property. Uh, Another way our business model puts us in alignment with starter home clients is that as a fee developer, we're just not in the business of construction arbitrage. Like I mentioned before, a typical uh, real estate developer who is taking on who's acquiring the property, taking on the debt risk of constructing the property, their game is to build as much square footage as possible, as cheaply as possible, and then sell it for as much as possible. That is their moment of creating profit. Now, that may not be the case in some smaller boutique developers. They really do care about quality, but we can get into larger scale tract home developers that are publicly traded that um, have a board and a fiduciary responsibility to deliver profit to their shareholders. That's really the business model. So they typical home developers incentivize building big homes cheaply and maxing out the build area on the lot. And so I think that this is an important one that they'll kind of buy a large piece of land, cut it up into the smallest lots that a subdivision plan would allow for, and then build the largest possible structure on that tiny lot, which of course removes the possibility of any future expansion. So hopefully, if you're getting a sort of McMansion like this, you're not really planning on growing it much further. But even that option is gone because the lot is maxed out on its constructability. The floor area ratio is all used up, and you can't build an ADU or an extension or anything else that would allow you to grow into the property. So our model is quite aligned, but so is our products. And so if you go through our standards, one thing that I hope comes across is that in all of our out of the box standards, there's a real commitment to um, space efficiency. And now that doesn't mean kind of tininess for tiny's sake. It has to do with usability and function. And one of the paradigms that we think about is the average square footage per person in new construction. In 1960, in a newly constructed house in America, there tended to be around 350 square feet allotted per person in the home. So two people in a house, around a 700 square foot house. Today, that average on new construction is around 1,050. So a lot of wasted space, two people in a house, almost 2,100 square feet on average across America in newly constructed homes. All of our standards kind of exist within this world from 500 square feet upwards to 1,800 square feet, with the lion's share of our homes really falling within this kind of starter home category. Certainly getting larger sometimes when we have different use cases, but when it's a couple, small family, we tend to think about those floor area ratios per person and what do we think is an appropriate scale. And we're able to achieve that through the space efficiency in our home products. Our home products are also designed for expansion through seamless addition of square footage. That you can see that a lot of our homes have a modularity to their thinking, that there's a natural way that if you were to add on a new primary suite, or if you were to extend in one way or another, it's very clear how that new structure would get tacked on. And that's not only in the design, but also in our thoughts about land use and groundwork planning, that when we start one of our projects, we try to imagine what this property would be 5 or 10 years down the line as our clients grow into it, and make sure that the septic infrastructure, the well infrastructure, the power infrastructure, all of these things can facilitate the future growth of the property, even if they only want to take on the financial responsibility of servicing a loan for kind of phase one, a smaller piece of constructed space. Not unlike what you see in this project, where hey, it starts from kind of a sort of unfinished barn and essentially a one-bedroom house, but there's a clear game plan for how we would grow into a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home over time. Our products are also designed for expansion through change of use. That it's not atypical for us to meet a client where we're planning for the idea that the initial use of the home that we're designing is going to be their primary home, and that in the future it may convert into either a rental property or an accessory dwelling unit on their existing property. And I think that is a real shift in mind from the kind of traditional notion of trading up in properties and sort of abandoning the one that you had before, and instead thinking about the home that you have not as something completely temporary, but as a place that you grow out of for your primary use, but it still remains part of either part of your portfolio or part of your property ongoing. And last, our home products are really designed for ease of construction and flexibility in finishing level. And so on the ease of construction side, you see that we have relatively simple detailing and consistent detailing that doesn't utilize a lot of exotic steel moments or kind of strange structural conditions. We are simplifying a lot of the forms of our homes, but then they can get finished either through exterior finishing or exterior finishing in different ways where they can become more down market or up market. And I think that helps a lot, both with having the property meet the local market conditions, but also giving another route for upgrade in the property without having to build a whole new house. And so all of that to say that Hutz's products and processes are really well positioned to support the creation of starter homes. That, as a rule, our products and processes our products are space efficient. We have different methods market by market to make them affordable relative to that market. And almost always, whether it's through land use or the house design itself, or the use of the property between primary and rental, there's a growth plan that we're thinking about, that we're unlike the very transactional developer who says, "Hey, I built this thing, you bought it, now it's your problem, and I guess it's your primary house." For us, we're almost always thinking about the property on generational timeframes, saying, "How is this place going to change over time, and um, how are you going to kind of enjoy some of the spoils of taking on this project of being your own home developer?" So let's look at a couple of examples that are in very different markets, also very different formats, but I think hit each of those criteria of space efficiency, of growth over time, and being affordable relative to the market. So the first is a starter home in rural Vermont. On our site, it's called Moose Alley. It's way up in the Northeast Kingdom, towards the Canadian border. It's around 950 square feet, and the target budget is 300 grand on it. And so that may seem like it's a very, very readily available figure in that area. The problem with this area that we find in extremely rural places all over is that you have limited resources, very high labor costs, and almost monopolistic pricing in areas where there's very few choices. And so you still need to be quite thoughtful around how do you deliver a property in an area like this that hits that goal. And so the first thing that we did is design a house that's very space efficient. The starting point here was our small bar, but we took advantage of the volume of the house to deliver more usable spaces. And so I'll kind of walk you through the floor plan, but on this left side, you can see we have living, kitchen, dining space, small kitchen, but true great room with full vaulted space. We have a washer, dryer, laundry area. We have full closets and full bath upstairs, and then two small bedrooms downstairs. Real stair going to the upstairs area where we have a full work from home office space and a primary bedroom. And so this really fits into that category of starter home. But here, this is sort of one of those examples where we're thinking about building the ADU first, treating that as a starter home, and then over time, the use starts to change. Some of the tactics that we utilize to make this affordable relative to the market are a simplified foundation condition. So looking at piers rather than deep excavation. So keeping our foundation costs down. Looking at owner supplied finishes and fixtures and appliances, where we help our clients source all tile, all flooring, all cabinets, all lighting fixtures, all appliances, all kinds of things that we're able to purchase at a discount through our vendor relationships, pass those discounts through to our clients, and remove all of those items which make up a high percentage of the overall construction costs from being subject to a contractor markup on the project, which right away takes off a lot of percentage on the overall cost. And then creative use of just simple and local materials, looking at pine flooring, plywood millwork, other things that, when detailed well, look fantastic, but require some of that thoughtfulness up front. And certainly wouldn't be an approach that a developer would take, and a traditional developer would take, and one that we try to employ to hit that market of affordability relative to the market. And then the last thing is that there's this plan for growth. Like I said, initially this project starts as, and this house is number one, it's the main house. But we have already planned for in this site plan and in our infrastructure planning where the future main house will be when this place converts into an accessory dwelling or a guest house or a rental property. And that makes it so that our clients are able to grow into this property rather than abandon it once they add more kids to their brood, or maybe their in-laws move in, which was all part of the thinking that we imagined up front. But again, we wouldn't have uncovered that unless we were talking about 5 or 10 year planning, understanding what a starter home today can become for them in the future, as their lives grow. Okay, let's move into a very different market, one of the most expensive construction markets in the country, on Martha's Vineyard. Um, Not only expensive because in a lot of ways, the entirety of the housing industry there and contractors there have sort of decided that let's make this expensive, but also it has real conditions, like it's on an island and it's difficult to access things. So a lot of our approach um, is about pushing against some of the kind of embedded narrative on island that, hey, things are just expensive here. And our starting point was, well, why? Why does it have to be that, when a lot of the materials, a lot of the approaches are sort of commoditized and look a lot like rural development that we're doing across the country? And so let's look at how we try to take on the starter home in our project in Martha's Vineyard. Um, so on our site, this is Oak Bluff's house on Martha's Vineyard, um, around 1,050 square feet, 500 grand. I'm sure some of you out there are saying, how in the world is that a starter home? Again, this is relative to the market, where on island, you'd be hard pressed to find anything old, new, existing housing stock under $1 million. And so relative to the market, we are seeking to completely change the dynamics of what the pricing can be on a newly constructed home in this area. The first thing to think about is that it's a non-conforming lot. It's essentially an infill lot. This is a very atypical kind of parcel in Martha's Vineyard. It's a little bit of a sliver. And we find that a lot of the opportunities for taking on either space efficient projects or ones that are very budget conscious, the starting point is sort of like a weird little wacky lot. And part of it is trying to figure out how to make sense of it and make the geometries work. And that often comes with, if you can go through that land use and groundwork coordination effort, you tend to be able to purchase a piece of land for less money and kind of reduce the cost to getting into an area where it'd be difficult to get a foothold. That's sort of the case here on this Martha's Vineyard lot, where this little corner lot has all sorts of considerations that we needed to think through, both on the design, but also on the zoning, on how to make it work. So the first thing here is that we had a limited footprint, and that kind of forced us to think small and think efficient in the design of the house. And then the next is, again, a very efficient home plan that has a tight footprint. It takes advantage of height and the volume of the house. Generally, upstairs square footage or lofted square footage is built at a reduced multiple of the cost of the ground floor, sometimes 60% of what the ground floor might cost. And you can see why, that you don't have excavation costs, foundation costs, a lot of the infrastructure costs baked into that upstairs square footage. So here we try to take advantage of that upstairs space. Here in the floor plan, you can see we've got kitchen and dining space, small living room. We have laundry, half bath, or sorry, full bath downstairs underneath the staircase, head up the steps. We've got two sleeping areas here that are flexible for kids, and then a primary bedroom. And so this works really, and you can see in these images, we are taking advantage of the height to bring in airiness and light into a space that, if it was not open, wouldn't feel quite that way, but all of a sudden becomes this really interesting kind of lofted experience with efficient kitchen space, efficient dining space, efficient bedrooms, but really open use of the lofted area and the height of the building without having the house kind of spread its wings and become non-conforming on this small lot. And so a few things that we did here to make this affordable relative to the market. And I think the big one is really panelization, that we are working with one of our panelization partners that are from off island, to reduce the build costs and the GC markup that would normally come on framing the house. So we are building the floor assemblies, the wall assemblies, the roof assemblies off island. It's happening in a closed manufacturing facility. And then all of those pieces and kind of chunks of the house will be loaded up onto a flatbed, and we'll have one big ferry trip coming across to on island to assemble the house, rather than tons of two by sixes and framing material and zip and windows and all kinds of things going back and forth on the ferry trip, all of which has time costs attached to it, and cash costs, real dollars. Beyond that, it gets the work indoors quickly. So it gets us into a shell of a house quite quickly, which great to do construction Martha's Vineyard in the summer, not as fantastic to be working outside in the North Atlantic in the winter. So the quicker we can kind of get the construction indoors and have local trades, local electricians, local plumbers, local MEP guys indoors, that's both going to be a bit of a bargaining chip on the labor costs for delivering on those pieces, and accelerates the time frame that the client is actually holding the construction loan and paying interest on the construction loan along the way. So there's a lot of benefits there to panelization in this use case. And then similarly, we went through owner supplied finishes and fixtures, sourcing and procurement for finishes, fixtures, appliances. Again, reducing the amount of scope that is subject to contractor markup, which is upwards of 20%. And all of those things combined kind of get us to a spot where we're building a newly constructed house that is not a format that is being built on island and is at a price point that is not familiar anymore to Martha's Vineyard. And then here again, there's sort of a growth plan embedded into this property that you'll have a change of use from personal residence to future rental property. And that is thinking that we baked in both the design of the house and the placement, the amenitization of the property, and what future plans for improvement might be on the property. And the last is a starter home in the Northern Catskills up in Delaware County towards Andes, New York. This is a 750 square foot space with loft, build budget target at 250 grand. And you're seeing some commonalities here when we think about starter homes, that we tend to take advantage of loft spaces, take advantage of our roof pitches, and how to get additional space up inside of the vaulted areas of our roofs. Here, this is a kind of classic example of a lot of our projects, and if you follow along to our development opportunities, where when cash availability is an issue or there's a desire to reduce the debt load on a project, we often recommend, let's start with the ADU. Let's kind of, which is a little bit upside down. It's quite typical that if you have a property where as of right, you can build a main house and an accessory dwelling, the conventional logic would be, well, let's do the main house and then we'll build the ADU down the line. Our take is often, let's go through the infrastructure planning for the main house and ADU, but let's actually take on the debt load and the construction financing for the ADU, or even pay for it out of pocket if it's possible, so that you have a place to stay. You have a place to maybe rent, should you choose, and you have a way to grow into the property and both determine what the main house should be once you've spent more time on the property, but also stretch out your financing a little bit and maybe start to have the place be revenue generating, which can help contribute to your thinking and your financing on the main house down the line. So in this case, you can see we have a entry in the rear of this kind of expanded accessory dwelling, where we have a kind of one wall kitchen with combo sort of dining space and countertop, uh, living room with a full bath underneath the loft, a full bedroom underneath the loft, staircase up to the loft space with a primary bedroom upstairs, which has its own view out to the forest from above. So a very, very efficient space that you can see how this plays out in the actual building that actually feels quite like voluminous and airy and large because we're taking advantage of not raw square footage, but instead the volume of the building and playing with light and air to make it feel much bigger than the square footage would suggest. And again, here we simplified the foundation conditions to reduce groundwork costs, excavation costs, and foundation costs. We went through owner supplied finishes and fixtures. And there's a lot of creative use of simple materials like concrete and ready to assemble kitchen cabinetry and other things that make the fit out of the house less expensive and one that could be improved or upgraded over time should the client choose. And that certainly rendered this property affordable relative to the market in that area. And there's a growth plan. Again, here we started with the ADU, but we had kind of master planning and infrastructure planning for the entirety of the project. That what starts as the primary house for our client will over time kind of seamlessly become their accessory dwelling, both for a guest house and rental revenue as they think about and take on the commitment and financing of their main house sometime in the future. But the planning for it and the infrastructure is already in place to make that a relatively seamless experience. So a little bit looking into the future and, starter homes and housing affordability is obviously in both a deep and rich academic subject that we don't have all the time for, and also a highly politicized and charged topic that is also not the subject of today's chat. But in the US today, there's just a massive housing shortage. Everyone knows it, everyone's aware, particularly among this kind of nearly extinct starter home category. I think if there's anything to get across is that today the idea of built en masse starter homes has largely gone the way of the dodo. And there is absolutely going to be a need for a new vision for what those units will be and who will be responsible for creating them in the future, because they have to happen. And I think it's important to recognize that there won't be a silver bullet solution, but a bunch of efforts to address the problem. Government-led, public-private joint ventures, innovative private endeavors that explore innovative methods of delivery. So like, modular stuff and prefab stuff and 3D printed houses and all kinds of things, joint financing amongst groups, fractional ownership. There's all kinds of notions that'll be there. What we went through is Hutz's approach today, utilizing the products that we have currently developed and the processes that we've utilized, and we have seen a lot of success hitting those three markets or those three criteria for what we think a starter home is today and what it should be going forward. And I think as a kind of closing note before I open it up to Q&A, sometimes the most important thing to do when imagining future solutions for a giant untenable problem is really just to focus on and remember what you don't want the outcome to be. And I think that that's also a way to get some consensus rather than saying, hey, there's this one perfectly designed Swiss Army knife that's going to solve the problem, or there's this one financing approach or government intervention or technology thing that's going to kind of like solve the problem. I think all of those in aggregate over time will kind of bend towards the solution. But it's very important to continue to keep in mind what we don't want the outcome to be. And I think everyone on this call could agree, like, we probably don't want it to be this. This is sort of the super intense top down. This is in China. And it's like, all right, government says we need more housing. Boom, here's more housing. And it's kind of has no nuance. It doesn't really, it sort of looks like a miserable condition to live in. And it certainly doesn't hit any of the criteria for what we think a starter home should be. It might solve the problem of now there's more units, but at what cost? And I think we also don't want it to be this sort of starter homes, or the way in to get a foothold into the housing space is to be living in kind of repackaged, unbelievably cheaply built kind of tiny homes with no space to grow underneath of power lines, that in the cheapest land possible. That's also clearly not the solution here. Um, and so before I open it up to QA, I think it's and there's more opportunities for conversation. I think it's good to get a little bit of consensus that this ain't it and this ain't it. And so let me come back and land somewhere that we're hoping is maybe a little closer to what may be it. Um, so um, let me stop here, I think, and open it up to Q&A. We got about 15-20 minutes, and Joe and I are going to do our best to field your questions on our perspectives on starter homes, our approach to taking them on, and anything else that's sort of relevant to the topic. And all you need to do is, let's see. Oh, so you can either put your questions in the chat, and I see that there's also a new function here for Q&A. So you can also use that. Juan asks, does the price include land purchase? It doesn't. Land costs all kinds of things wherever it is, but that is certainly with our clients. I'm sure if you've been following along, that's often a spot where we meet our clients is when they have really nothing at all. They don't have land. They kind of have an area. They kind of have a budget, and we are working through the development math, their pro forma on their project first, and then saying, cool, based on the type of program you have in mind, the type of build budget that's going to make sense, your long-term goals, this is sort of what you should spend on land to make all of that math work.
Yeah, that sort of gets to a different question too, Wayne. It's like when we think about price and when we talk about this with our clients, it's not, what the final big number is important, but the most important thing is sort of what is your carrying cost throughout the course of the project. If you were to buy an existing single family home on the market, you're going to a bank, you're putting 20% down, and you're purchasing sort of a 30-year mortgage on that property. You're not often buying the full house in cash right away. If you were, you're probably not looking for a starter home to begin with. Mm-hmm. But when we're thinking about things in that context, what we do with a lot of our clients is, for example, that project in Moose Alley. Let's say they purchased the land for a 20% down on a $300,000 construction project's $80,000. That'd be a similar thing if you're buying a 30-year mortgage. The amount of cash you would need to have down. You purchase land for $80,000, or a bank will look at that and they'll give you about 80%. They'll value that land about 80% of its value, and you'd be able to finance your construction loan with your land as collateral without additional cash down as collateral. So you can essentially, working with the bank partners, utilize the land purchase to finance the construction loan to build that starter home very much in the same way that you could, buying a traditional mortgage and putting a 20% down. That varies by region, varies by bank, but in theory, that's that type of strategy that can be pursued sort of to get to there. So we're not thinking about like, I need $300,000 cash on hand plus $100,000 cash on hand to get a starter home. It's more $80,000 cash on hand. How does that unlock sort of the full construction and really force equity into the project? And you're not just thinking about it as a big line item expense.
Mm-hmm. Barbara writes, you offer homes in the North Fork of Long Island. This is the location I'm interested in. I love the North Fork, Barbara. We should definitely chat about your project. Do you build in Hawaii? We certainly design for Hawaii. So anonymous, I'd love to chat about your project. Can you speak about the longevity of the alternative foundation solutions you use? Yeah, so I mean, I think that we basically within our standards have a inventory of foundation details that are appropriate for different conditions. So you can call it kind of helical piers or piles. You can is one. We have slab on grade details. We have crawl space details and full basement details. And based on both cost and what the landscape requires, we apply those foundation conditions. The I wouldn't say that there's any like real longevity consideration between them that over some point, helical piers are crumbling. That's not really, uh, we wouldn't even kind of offer that as a solution if that was one of the risks. But we're usually looking at foundations through the lens of which foundation to utilize through the lens of cost and landscape. What is the land kind of call for? Anonymous asks, what's the first step? Does your team help evaluate land parcels and zoning implications, or do we do that ourselves? We do that. I think that that's one of the most important parts of being a good Sherpa for our clients in the development process. And Joe, do you want to look like you want to pick up on
that? No, I wasn't going to add anything.
Oh, okay.
But no, it is. Yeah, it is important. I mean, like it's, you'd hate to buy a piece of land that especially a rural piece of land that has certain septic requirements or well requirements that, you buy the piece of land and then you just decide, actually, we can't build on it affordably, mm-hmm. or the town doesn't allow me to build the amount of square footage or the home that I sort of want on here. Mm-hmm. So sort of that early due diligence when we're looking at pieces of land is something we help our clients with very often.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that was anonymous or somebody else, but let's say it was anonymous. Anonymous, it's also selfish for us, right? Like we want to evaluate these parcels so that we're not fighting against them forever. There have been plenty of times where we didn't have a couple of times where we didn't have a relationship with the land before. We didn't get a chance to see it before. We kind of inherited it into the project. And what do you know? There's all kinds of DEP issues. There's wetlands that were never delineated. There's it's in a flood zone and really should have never been built on to begin with. And selfish, or there's a zoning issue and it's going to require all these variances, and then we have to go in front of public hearings and get yelled at in a town somewhere. These are all real things that have happened, and the more we can avoid those, the better, and understand, hey, here's what you can do on this land, here's why we think it's going to work, and here's the level of complexity that's going to go into it, so that we can determine, yeah, that sounds like a good level of enough heavy lifting here for us to be interested in, or hey, like the cost of this isn't going to make sense. The acquisition cost of the land might have been fine, but the improvement costs are going to blow this project out of the water. Let's look at some other easier piece of land to develop. So long way of saying, yes, we love being involved quite early and helping to evaluate the land, helping to source the land, and offering recommendations for how we would develop that place. Shane writes, when looking at the Huts or Land Report website, are these current opportunities available? For instance, is Hawley's Corners Road? So when you're looking at the development opportunities or the land report, these are publicly listed lots that we are taking a step further, where I'm sure for lots of you out there, one of the reasons you're on this call is that you're interested in designing and developing your own home. And if you've also been a follower of us, you know that you can't really design and develop a house for a piece somewhere unless it can go on a piece of land. Can't yet float around on balloons. And so the land matters a lot. The problem with the land search is that the realtors who list land and the processes of evaluating land online are presenting one step of the problem, and they're generally poorly presenting a piece of land that they're looking for you to acquire, and then they're gone, right? Whoever's listing it, whoever is selling it, that's your land. Good luck with it. For us, we want to put context to the lots that we curate from out in the world and say, cool, here's a piece of land that seems like a good fit for this sort of project or this strategy of land development that we have in mind. And and putting context to those otherwise just blurry pictures of trees and whatever photos were taken, and saying here's exactly what it would take to develop this place. And so those lots are available for purchase, and then we are available as a service company to help develop that lot in the way that we've described. um, Shane says, very interested in North Peak in Julian, California. We'll be there next week looking at available real estate. Would be interested in a similar huts project there. You, Shane, are in luck. That is a very interesting project because things change occasionally with clients. We have gone through the entirety of the design process. There's a contractor on board. The design is it's permitted. It is a turnkey project, and the client is looking to sell it, the land with the home plans and the material sourcing that we've already gone through, and the construction budget that we've already defined, and the contractor that we've already onboarded attached to the project. So if you're looking for a really beautiful piece of land with a project that looks not something like North Peak, but is North Peak, that is a good project for you. Reach out separately, and we'll put you in touch with the client, who is now the seller of that development project. Micah writes, would you say it's more helpful to decide what home design it's most workable and allow that to drive the most appropriate lot, or vice versa? Yes. So that's a really kind of key point. Very typical developer approach would be, you figure out how to buy a piece of land, put it under agreement, and then go through a process of what's called determining the highest and best use. And that's how you end up with some of these sorts of projects that I laid out in this presentation, where it's like, how much can I possibly build on this place as cheaply as possible to then sell to the consumer? When you are both the developer and the consumer, which with our clients, they are, you instead should work backwards and say, what does the house need to be? What does the property need to be? How am I going to use it? What can my carrying costs be? And that allows us to back into, here's the pricing and the location and the natural conditions of a lot should be that can facilitate a project like that. So we almost always want to lay out the entirety of the kind of project vision, and then determine what the lot requirements should be at the end. Now, I will caveat that by saying there is a lot to be said for magic on a parcel, that going there and saying, I'm just feeling it at this place, and maybe that blows up my budget a little bit, 50 grand one way or the other. We're certainly open to that. And I think that amortized over 30 years of living in the house, that 50 grand, not to be crass, but sort of won't matter over time, but the place will. And so it's always kind of a balance between us putting very tight guardrails on our clients and saying, this is sort of where you should be. And maybe there's a little bit of a magic quotient that comes in on some of these pieces of land that is worth listening to. Cheryl asks, I've already purchased land in the Adirondacks. Congratulations. I'll be ready to build in 1 year. What do I need to do to prepare the land, such as a perk test? I have already had it surveyed. Get a perk test. That's number one. Rural land, land use matters, but really for residential home construction, the number one thing that matters both to the Board of Health, the local town offices, and anyone else who's going to be either financing or permitting the project is suitability of a septic location. So Cheryl, absolutely get a perk test. And if you want to talk about the design or development of your house, get in touch with us as well. Joanne writes, do you take on projects related to additions and or renovations to existing homes, specifically attached or separate artist studios? For sure. Would love to hear what you have in mind. We love working on outbuildings. Really, really cool. A lot of our projects have either sometimes there's an existing structure where it's part of the program of like, we're going to spruce this thing up and make it more functional, and we're going to add a little building next to it and make it all feel like kind of a coherent compound or sort of a collection of structures. So Joanne, we would love to hear about your project. Does the design accommodate threats such as wildfire, hurricane, and earthquakes? Yes. So we work across the country. Our standards first of all, were designed as an initial product with pretty extreme conditions in mind. So imagining sort of um, northeast mountain areas that have 120 degrees of temperature swings, often are in high wind zones, enormous snow loads. And so a lot of the detailing out of the box has those components. But as our projects have hit more local conditions and local regulations, whether it's in the Pacific Northwest or whether it's along fault lines in California, or whether it's at high altitude in Idaho, where kind of crazy wind speeds, our catalog of details to address those conditions has grown, and so the standard again is not really just the home plan; it's all of the building science thinking that allows the house to be modified and localized for your area. So um, yeah, so again, like Anonymous thinking about wildfire, we had to go through a whole kind of material selection and material detailing requirement for our North Peak project, which is in kind of like a place that is guaranteed to have wildfires. And so the material assemblies and the material choices had to address that. Projects that we're doing in the Bay Area are very clear kind of earthquake considerations, or really anything in California. And then hurricanes or special wind zones and how we kind of deal with that is has been kind of addressed along our projects. But we always do want to take on projects in new areas, not only to for three reasons: not only to expand our portfolio and our footprint, two, to give us an excuse to visit that place. Honestly, it's like, hey, cool, now I have a reason to go to wherever it is that you are. But I think the last is to force us to build out um, our detail catalog, so that the same way I mentioned on foundations, we have all these different kind of foundation conditions we can bring in based on the local requirements or the land calls for. We want to be able to do that with everything, just to kind of have these sets of ingredients to make our standards become unique to your specific lot, your specific location. Um, let's see. Does a town have the right to decline this type of construction? No, this is standard construction technique. Sometimes, our houses are designed to both be panelized or site built, and are we are meeting the one of our major requirements is that we want to work on projects that have an opportunity to get done. We have very little interest in working on like projects that were too expensive to ever get off the ground, or they're going to be what's called like paper architecture. They're going to live as plans, and that's it. We're really in the business of delivering homes, which means that we have flexibility to make sure that we understand what the permit office requirements are, and then make sure we're meeting those when we submit for permits. Barbara writes, isn't buying land cash only? Not necessarily. Sometimes you can have a land acquisition loan and then pair it with a construction loan and bundle the two together into a 30-year fix. But a very typical capital stack for a new construction home project like Joe is getting to is that you will buy a piece of land for a value that would represent 20 cash for a value that would represent 20% loan to value of the resulting project. So for instance, if you were going to do round numbers, $1 million project, all told, where it has $800,000 of construction, you might buy a $200,000 piece of land cash and use that as your deposit on your loan. Marianne Trim said, if a starter home would be my ending home. It's a little macabre, but I understand the point of this is a place that its next life would be with your kids and be a generational property that would be an asset that they would hold. And we think about those things a lot as well. Both what is the relationship of the property to like subdivision or even like thinking about some of the dynamics of trusts and how property kind of transfers between generations. And then on the design side, thinking about kind of age in place considerations, like the idea of lofts kind of go away and single story living, and how do we have accessibility? Maybe even thinking about if you were to have help down the line, where might they stay? And we have a couple of projects like that, that rather than it being for somebody who's kind of a couple who's 28, we have a couple of projects where it's for somebody who's 82 and they're thinking about what the tail end of their housing solution is going to be in their life. And we like thinking through those considerations.
There's a question from anonymous towards the bottom, who asked if he's or if we work with small developers who wish to create starter home pocket communities. We do. We have a few clients right now who we're actively working with to do that. That are kind of describing projects exactly as you are right here. So if you're interested in discussing that with us, definitely feel free to reach out. Wayne at huts.com, Joe at huts.com. We'd love to talk to you about what you're thinking.
Right on. Yeah, anonymous. Make yourself less anonymous and let's chat about what you have in mind. Okay, so I think we have hit time, so try to answer as many questions as we can. I really like doing these Q&As. It gives us a really good beat on what people's kind of thoughts are and concerns and questions are. Next week, I'm hosting at I think Thursday of next week an Ask Me Anything. Maybe I'm opening myself up to troubles. I'm not sure, but kind of take office hours for an hour and take in as many questions as I possibly can. So if you have more questions that I wasn't able to field here, or Joe wasn't able to field here, certainly reach out to us directly, or feel free to register for that next webinar and you can pepper me with some questions then. Thank you everyone so much for joining. It was a pleasure to walk through some of our philosophy and approaches on the starter home. And we're excited to continue to develop our approaches and hopefully be a participant in making a dent in a very meaningful and urgent problem. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.